Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Ecology Reader's Briefing, the podcast that turns a full issue of a major magazine into a focused 30 to 60-minute audio briefing. Today, we are bringing you a reader's guide to the August 2026 issue of The Atlantic. This issue's cover uses transparent paper and a headline that gradually fades from view. The age of reading is over. The words appear to dissolve into digital noise, capturing the issue's central concern. Are we entering a post-literate era? And as sustained reading gradually disappears from everyday life, what might humanity lose? This issue revolves around 5 major questions. First, as the decline of extended reading weakens comprehension, reasoning, memory, and independent thought, how will civilization respond to the post-literate era now taking shape? Second, artificial intelligence is producing large amounts of low-quality content and creating new disputes over data rights. At the same time, it is expanding the possibilities for collaboration between humans and machines. What will this transformation do to art? Third, when the language of spiritual warfare moves beyond churches and social media and enters local disputes, political confrontation, and physical security, how can ordinary neighbors be recast as enemy forces? Fourth, can consumer socialism continue to operate when universal subsidies and price controls collide with constrained supply, limited taxation capacity, and growing pressure on municipal budgets? Fifth, the slave ship White Lion and the Mayflower represent the long conflict among American freedom, enslavement, and the search for a shared national story. Can the histories of 2 ships help explain America? Taken together, the articles in this issue examine how societies construct meaning, distribute resources, define enemies, create art, and preserve collective memory. The decline of reading is not simply a change in media habits. It may reshape the way people understand complex ideas, retain knowledge, reason carefully, and think independently. Artificial intelligence is not merely another creative tool. It is challenging established ideas about authorship, ownership, originality, and collaboration. Political and religious language does not remain confined to words. Under pressure, it can reshape how communities perceive one another and turn ordinary social disagreements into struggles between good and evil. Economic promises also face material limits. Subsidies and price controls may provide immediate relief, but their durability depends on supply, taxation, public finances, and administrative capacity. National history cannot be reduced to a single founding story. The White Lion and the Mayflower revealed 2 intertwined histories. One was shaped by aspirations for freedom. The other was built upon enslavement. Together, they show that the struggle over America's identity has been present from the beginning. Next, we turn to the individual article briefings in this issue.
Section 1. Civilization, Technology, and Public Risk. 1.1. The age of reading is over. The danger is no longer that scrolls will turn to ash. It is that people are gradually losing the desire and ability to read extended texts. America is not simply becoming illiterate. It is entering a post-literate era filled with words but deprived of deep reading. In 2022, fewer than half of American adults said that they had read a book of any kind. The proportion who read for pleasure on a given day fell from 28% in 2004 to 16% in 2023. A national test in 2024 found that only 35% of high school seniors could analyze complex themes and evaluate whether an argument was effective. Nearly 30% of adults could not accurately paraphrase a multi-page text or make inferences from it. Emails, messages, posts, and short videos break language into small fragments. Endless scrolling, hyperlinks, and notifications keep pulling attention elsewhere, while schools often use excerpts and digital devices to meet testing demands. Average attention on a screen fell from about 2 minutes and 30 seconds in 2004 to about 47 seconds. When children watched animation, the brain regions involved in imagination were used only about half as much as when they listened to a story while looking at static illustrations. The article argues that reading and writing trained inner concentration, logical deduction, and abstract thought, while print culture made claims available for recording, checking, and renewed questioning. Social platforms reward brief, inflammatory, emotionally resonant expression, and generative artificial intelligence may let users bypass the difficult process that produces learning. The decline is not irreversible. Nearly 24 states restricted student phone use at school, and after one Texas ban took effect, a district checked out 200,000 more library books. The real test is whether people will still sit down, endure slowness, enter another mind, and continue reading the knowledge they have inherited. 1.2. What AI will do to art. Artificial intelligence will not save art by itself, and it will not destroy art by itself. It is more likely to place another layer of imperfect creation over the old world, while greatness will still depend on sustained human care. When Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst prepared Attention Guild for an 18th century palace in Venice, they first planned to suspend a three-dimensional city printed in sand from the ceiling. The weight could have reached several tons, so they replaced it with an upside-down parliament. 4 intelligent agents communicated in sounds resembling birdsong, and the installation explored high-technology democracy, public knowledge, and shared life between people and machines. Generative artificial intelligence has nearly 1 billion weekly active users, and the entertainment industry has begun to absorb its advantages in speed and cost, while the world is also being filled with smooth, sticky, easily reproduced slop. Painters, musicians, designers, writers, and filmmakers object to models absorbing human work without permission. Herndon and Dryhurst argue that the technology has already entered real life, and that artists who withdraw completely will leave companies to decide the rules alone. They trained neural networks to sing, built a Holly Plus platform so that users could transform their voices with permission, and proposed that identity play is the new intellectual property and that creation is collective. Interaction with a model is not simply a one-directional use of a tool. It is a feedback loop in which people change the machine while the machine changes them. Excitement cannot conceal the external costs of energy use, labor displacement, autonomous weapons, and data rights. Their company Spawning recorded at least 2 billion requests to exclude works from training data, but it depended on voluntary compliance and closed in 2025. The Venice installation also faced delayed equipment, incorrectly sized screens, and an operating system failure. Once machines gained agency, human work did not disappear. It shifted towards setting rules, observing results, and making continuous corrections. Infinite media do not make details less important. They demand more judgment in every work. 1.3. The Demons of Maryville. The most important danger was not one particular prayer. It was the way a language could rewrite neighbors as enemy forces and then make fear, legal action, and armed vigilance appear natural. After Mike and Andrea Brewer founded the Well Revival Hub in 2016, they came to believe that Southland Books across the street was a stronghold controlled by a high-ranking demon. They joined the network associated with the New Apostolic Reformation, described churches as military bases and believers as warriors, and treated prayer as a strategy for retaking space and displacing territorial demons. Thursday deliverance sessions asked visitors whether they had encountered tarot cards, meditation, yoga, pornography, anger, depression, or gender confusion, and then identified demons according to the form of suffering. The rituals gave some people an intense sense of love and wholeness, but they could also turn problems requiring medical care, psychological treatment, or social support into invisible enemies. Southland had long hosted readings, punk shows, fundraisers, and drag performances, and its owner, Lisa Masosky, was accused of collaborating with the high-ranking demon Lilith. The Brewers also used an old state law to pressure prosecutors, police, and local officials. On the day of an event, 9 masked men arrived to protest, and at least one appeared to carry a gun. Masovsky later kept firearms, a baseball bat, and wasp spray in the store and completed active shooter training. By 2024, about 61% of American Christians believed that modern apostles and prophets still existed, and nearly half believed that demonic powers could control physical territory. The article argues that calling political opponents demonic bypasses the religious command to love one's enemies. The other side is no longer made up of citizens with mistaken views, but of forces that must be expelled. Maryville did not become a large-scale conflict, but it showed how online narratives, religious authority, local law enforcement, and extremist organizations can amplify one another in the same place. 1.4. The Consumer Socialism Trap. Consumer socialism seeks to socialize the cost of consumption by freezing rents, creating city-run grocery stores, providing universal child care, and expanding housing subsidies, rather than placing production directly under workers' control. It tries to combine universal provision, lower prices, and no broad tax increase, and therefore places great confidence in public planners. Universality is politically attractive, but it requires programs to be calculated across the full population, while local tax bases can move with investment and residential choices. New York has more than 8 million residents, yet Mamdani could open at most 5 city-run grocery stores by the end of his first term, and universal child care had received only 2 years of funding. A newly approved tax on second homes was expected to raise about $500 million a year, while universal child care would cost $6 billion a year. If a city rapidly expands child care subsidies without expanding the number of qualified providers and workers, existing providers may raise prices. A rent freeze can protect current tenants, but it cannot create new apartments. Without new supply, price restrictions redistribute scarcity instead of removing it. Local governments usually have to balance their budgets quickly, and open-ended subsidies are shaped at once by the number of recipients, market prices, and administrative rules. The article does not argue that consumer socialism must fail. If subsidies advance together with large increases in housing, child care centers, and public transit capacity, residents may receive real new choices. If supply and tax revenue do not keep pace, collectivism may feel warmer, but it will remain extraordinarily expensive and difficult to sustain.
Section 2. Nation, Institutions, and Public Memory. 2.1. The Slave Ship and the Mayflower. America can acknowledge that the Mayflower and the slave ship existed together without allowing either vessel to determine the future alone. David Reynolds used the White Lion, which reached Virginia in 1619, and the Mayflower, which reached Plymouth in 1620, to interpret American history as a long conflict between liberty, covenant, and equality on one side, and hierarchy, domination, and chattel slavery on the other. The Mayflower passengers signed a compact promising a civil political community and just and equal laws for the general good. Early Virginia codes gradually placed Anglican hierarchy and slavery at the center of colonial life. The contrast has a real foundation, but it can make complex history look like one side of light and one side of darkness. New England law was also harsh. Northern merchants profited from the slave economy, and Southern elites read Enlightenment thinkers and Republican traditions. They did not need to become Puritans before resisting royal power. The two ships are a strained explanation of the American Revolution, but they become more persuasive before the Civil War, when Southern life was organized around slavery and Northern politics was increasingly organized around opposition to it. Victory in the war did not complete equality. National reconciliation later rewrote a conflict between freedom and enslavement as a family reunion between white Northerners and Southerners. The article warns that tracing today's red and blue division entirely to 1619 and 1620 ignores tens of millions of immigrants, population movement, industrialization, urbanization, and new institutions. Metaphors compress conflict into memorable images, but they can hide enslaved people, indigenous people, later immigrants, and those excluded from elite documents. A common nation does not require forgetting conflict. It requires preserving common humanity after conflict is remembered, because institutions can be chosen, changed, and made the responsibility of later generations. 2.2. The Rosenberg Boys. The facts of the Rosenberg case are more complicated than either side has wanted to admit. Legal injustice does not turn the parents' lies into truth, and their espionage does not make an extraordinarily severe punishment just. In 1953, 10-year-old Michael and 6-year-old Robbie stood outside the White House and asked President Eisenhower to spare their parents. After Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed, the brothers became orphans. The principal witnesses, David Greenglass and his wife Ruth, admitted taking part in a spy ring led by Julius, but at trial they added the fatal claim that Ethel had typed David's notes. Prosecutors had treated Ethel as leverage to force Julius to confess, and the judge linked Soviet access to the atomic bomb with casualties in the Korean War. Julius died after 3 electrical charges. Ethel received 5 charges, and her execution took about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The brothers were later adopted by Anne and Abel Meeropol and regained family life amid music, jokes, pets, and an electric train set. In the 1970s, they publicly reclaimed the Rosenberg identity, pursued government documents through the Freedom of Information Act, and continued to argue that their parents had not been atomic spies. The Venona files, released in 1995, confirmed that Julius, David, and Ruth had provided information to the Soviet Union. In 2008, Morton Sobel also acknowledged that he and Julius had passed military secrets. The brothers accepted that their father had spied, while continuing to argue that the charges and punishment were disproportionate. David later admitted that his testimony about Ethel's typing was false, and a document declassified in 2024 stated that Ethel knew about her husband's work but did not engage in that work. The brothers still seek their mother's exoneration and have turned family trauma into public action. Robbie created a fund for children who lost support, faced imprisonment, or suffered discrimination because of their parents' political activity, and he called the work constructive revenge. 2.3. Full stop. Punctuation will not disappear. It will continue to change its function. Law still needs relatively stable syntax. Literature still uses marks to control rhythm. And private communication continues to invent new codes. The article traced punctuation from a system that helped readers from different regions pronounce text accurately into an infrastructure for law, religion, literature, and everyday communication. Different ratified versions of the Second Amendment used 2, 3, or 4 commas, showing that punctuation was not standardized in the founding era, and that a modern legal conclusion cannot easily rest on one pause. Writers also turned dashes, parentheses, commas, and periods into individual voices. Emily Dickinson used dashes of different lengths and directions to create suspension and leaps. while another war novel used no periods at all, letting commas sound like breathing in the trenches. Instant communication has changed the social meaning of these marks again. For many digital natives, a final period can seem cold or passive-aggressive, while complete punctuation may signal mock seriousness or irony. Emoji, animated images, and private stickers now carry tone, identity, and group codes. Creativity has increased, and so has misunderstanding. The same period can close a sentence or open a generational argument. Writing never conveys information alone. It also tests relationships.
Section 3. Health, Ecology, and Industry. 3.1. Tennis's New Golden Age. The New Golden Age has two sides. Champions are younger, competition is denser, and earnings are higher, while the calendar, injuries, gambling abuse, and constant exposure steadily wear players down. When Federer, Nadal, and Williams began leaving the sport in 2022, fans expected a long gap. Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, Iga Swiatek, and Aryna Sabalenka arrived ahead of schedule. In less than 4 years, the four players won a combined 21 major titles. Elite players also depend on coaches, fitness specialists, physiotherapists, nutrition advisors, sports psychologists, and biomechanics experts. A top athlete now resembles a small multinational business. Earnings reached record levels. The men's and women's champions at the 2025 United States Open received $5 million each, while Goff, Sabalenka, and Swiatek ranked among the highest-paid women in sport. Money did not remove vulnerability. Legal betting sends gamblers abuse and threats directly to players' phones, while modern rackets, strings, and training methods place stronger impacts on the body. The tour crosses the world, and highly ranked players have a real off-season of only about 1 month. The more they win, the more matches they play, and the faster their bodies wear down. Some women have used breaks, trauma therapy, returns after childbirth, and ranking protection to show that pausing does not mean surrendering athletic value. Leading men and women have also begun acting together to demand a larger share of revenue, fewer compulsory media duties, and a possible new elite tour with fewer events and a genuine off-season. What will decide whether this era lasts is not only the next trophy, but whether players can turn individual star power into institutional change. 3.2. Paradise Revisited. The Galapagos Islands are not a natural museum preserved in 1835. They are an ecosystem formed by volcanoes, colonial history, tourism capital, and continuing restoration. The islands receive more than 300,000 visitors a year, and every person seeking untouched nature adds pressure through roads, flights, boats, waste, and introduced species. Darwin was 22 when he arrived, stayed only 5 weeks, and did not form the theory of natural selection on the spot. He failed to label every specimen by island and later needed other people's records to reconstruct the evidence. Scientific discovery was not a flash of inspiration. It was the result of years of sorting, comparison, and revision. Darwin and the crew also ate, rode, and hunted giant tortoises. Animals that had not faced human predators lacked escape responses and were therefore easier to destroy. Pigs, goats, rats, and other introduced species damaged vegetation and ate eggs and young animals. After a long disappearance, land iguanas were reintroduced to parts of the islands only after 2019. Modern research has shifted from finding new species to repairing relationships disrupted by people, but removing plants or killing insects can create new disasters. Scientists must balance speed with ecological humility. The death of Lonesome George showed that the final animal of a kind usually appears not in a sudden crisis, but at the end of population decline, reproductive failure, habitat change, and long neglect. Tourism cannot simply be abolished because residents, the national park, scientific stations, and restoration projects all need income. Protecting the islands means giving up the fantasy of leaving no trace and accepting that every arrival already helps shape the future. Conservation is not one moment of feeling. It is a long discipline. 3.3. The Cicerone. The work of an elite guide is not simply to satisfy wealthy visitors. It is to combine knowledge, relationships, and judgment so that a brief entry can help more works remain where they are. Fulvio de Bonis cannot arrange lunch with the Pope, but his network of curators, conservators, clergy, doormen, grandees, and drivers can open museums after closing, private palaces, and restoration studios. Imago Artis grew to about 50 professional employees, offered service in 12 languages, and used 20 vehicles to rehearse routes and manage checkpoints, narrow stone walls, temporary road closures, and paparazzi. The value of special access is not merely skipping a line. In a conservation studio, the writer watched a restorer remove darkened varnish one small area at a time with a gentle solvent. In the closed church of Sant'Agostino, conservators explained how Caravaggio adjusted pigment and light. Rome's cultural assets often exist as a whole made of buildings, locations, archives, and viewing conditions. They are expensive and fragile, and they depend on public institutions, private money, and professional labor. Fulvio described expensive travel as a community of care, while recognizing that privilege and limits remain. Lunch with the Pope cannot be arranged. Historic buildings have load limits, and a conservator's time cannot be bought without end. Privilege can leave something more lasting than a photograph only when access helps people understand restoration, materials, and the history of the city.
Section 4. Art, Viewing, and Material Culture. 4.1. The mischievous, maddening Marcel Duchamp. Duchamp dismantled the authority of skill, the original object, and the artist, but he did not eliminate power. He shifted it toward naming, context, and interpretation. He recoiled from the preciousness of art and preferred chants, jokes, sex, and machine movement. In 1913, he mounted a bicycle wheel on an upside-down fork and a wooden stool, helping open the way for the ready-made. In 1917, he turned a porcelain urinal on its back, signed it Our Mutt, and named it Fountain, placing an ordinary object, the museum system, and the viewer's judgment inside the same question. The Museum of Modern Art retrospective resembled an archive or a crime scene. Many objects were replicas authorized by the artist, so the identity of the work rested on selection and naming rather than on irreplaceable material. The large glass used glass, lead wire, oil, varnish, and dust to form a mechanical design about a bride and her bachelors. Cracks created during transportation were accepted into the finished work, making chance a co-author. Duchamp also created the female alter ego Rose Salavi and used copies, cross-dressing, wordplay, and chess to manage his artistic identity. The secretly completed Étant Donné forced viewers to look through pee-holes in a door at a nude woman, turning every viewer into a voyeur. The article argues that although Duchamp appeared to mock romance, machinery, logic, and chance remained tied to frustrated desire. He did not tell viewers what art is. He made every yes and no expose its own assumptions, leaving viewers responsible for their aesthetic judgment. The article argues that although Duchamp appeared to mock romance, machinery, logic, and chance remained tied to frustrated desire. He did not tell viewers what art is. He made every yes and no expose its own assumptions, leaving viewers responsible for their aesthetic judgment. 4.2. Look closer. Peter de Hoog's interior with women beside a linen cupboard contains no grand event, yet its ordinary room shows that knowledge always comes from a particular position. We can see a great deal, but never everything at once. Two women stand beside a linen cupboard, the cloth is neatly folded, and household order appears stable. What truly moves the painting is the arrangement of walls, doors, windows, stairs, and sightlines. The staircase at the right rises toward an unseen upper floor. The window at the left admits light. The central door connects the room to an entry hall, another doorway, the canal, and buildings beyond. Architecture breaks looking into a sequence, and every opening reveals and conceals at the same time. Near the threshold stands an easily missed child holding a golf club and preparing to strike a ball. Every other object is settled, while this one action belongs to the next moment. The ball may cross the room at an angle, pass the threshold, or even travel toward the space outside the painting. The brightest area contains no person, while the figure about to act stands in shadow. Distant light carries the eye outward, and the child's pose pulls it back to the threshold. Looking closely does not mean turning every detail into a symbol or rushing toward a single answer. It means first asking where the light comes from, where the lines direct the eye, and which figure the first glance missed. Duchamp gives viewers interpretive freedom without removing the evidence. Knowledge begins with patience and remains reliable by acknowledging its limits.
All right, we are now ready to enter today's main program. Before we do, please like, save, and share this episode so that other people who need it can also see today's content and become better versions of themselves. Thank you. You can now use the timeline in the video description or the pinned comment to find the articles that interest you and listen to them in depth.